in essence, each one I think is a really simple concept, and I think that's why it's so wonderful in terms of people being able to explore it. And I absolutely don't buy into this. There's this idea, the fetishization of lineage, and the idea of, yeah, it is difficult. I understand that, and to learn, for people to learn stuff on their own, and I understand that concept. And I was speaking to my senior student a few months ago when I was talking about doing some videos, and he's saying, well, the one thing you can't replicate is that intensive, like, one-on-one or one-on-two, one-on-three training, where teachers really work like a proper professional level coaching project, where you're working with someone and checking every posture, and that journey is very difficult to replicate, and that's the same with all sports, of course. But in terms of some of the principles and the idea that you can proceed via intuition, which is one of Wang Changji's key ideas, in that sense, there's tons and tons of stuff that people can work on their own, and it's very important to understand that, because if you don't understand that, then you don't understand how the method works. That most of what we're trying to unfold is unfolded, it's not learned. So I always say no one can really teach you Yiquan, because we're talking about something that's natural, and this was always the idea. And again, it's interlinked with these ideas of politics and nationalism that were occurring at the time when Yiquan was being developed, that something was required that both interlinked the ancient past, that interlinked with the ancient past, and also interlinked with the frontiers of science, with physics and understanding it. And nothing fulfills that idea more than the idea that that you can produce kinetic force, that you can explore how to form a structure and produce kinetic force, hit with power, following these ancient principles of wushu being in harmony with nature. And at the same time, what we mean there by nature is things that are in accordance with the laws of physics. So the formation of a structure to hit, and the way that the structure is formed, the magic of it is in the realness of it, not in the spirituality of it is in the exploring your own physical capability and finding that you can generate force by understanding how structure and movement work. And that was a very important idea at the foundation of each one, that you could find these interlinks between the concepts of physics and this kind of Taoist concepts of following nature. And this doesn't mean things like it doesn't necessarily mean things like seeing a circle and thinking, oh well, circles are in nature, so I should be circular, or something like that. It's an intuitive sense of your own body and how it functions, and of course that varies between people. And intuition guided by culture, so that's where the method comes in, and the teachers, and the structure of learning, this kind of external factor as opposed to the internal factor of your intuitive progress, and these two things interlink together. That there are certain ways of moving, there are certain postures that you can adopt when you want to hit with force, and these are both natural, so you can intuitively develop them. So like most people spend a lot of time, you're just hitting the bag, and then it's like, oh, that one time out of 8 was like 20% more powerful. Like, what was it that you did that was different in that? And then you're searching for that, and so on. And all of those postures you're developing it intuitively. No one can teach you that stuff, because it's about feeling how your body works, feeling how your body functions when it, it's experiential knowledge that no one can put. They can guide you, they can give you rough shapes and say, look, it looks like this, and you can look at it and look at the way they move, and they can correct little bits of your posture to, just the same with any sport. But you've got to feel it and how it feels. And particularly in each one where I've talked about this idea of intentional arcs, so through through standing and slow movement, developing this sense of the interlinking of joints around different interconnections, usually arcs, like here's one here, you know, and it's much more than proprioception. It's a body consciousness of the, and then feeling how that interlinks when you actually hit an object, and how you need to move and how your structure needs to function to do that. That's not knowledge that someone can just put in you. That's knowledge that has to develop intuitively. And at the same time, as you then proceed to find what it was that made that one punch more powerful, well, that is something that's in accordance with the laws of physics. It's something that there's something there. There's a more perfect alignment of physical posture combined with, you know, the right amount, the right combination of relaxation and tension, and the right kind of body movement, and just the right amount of force, and just the right when you hit the contact point, the structure is just perfectly formed, or as close as possible. And most people will have experiences like that. Like, I've had a couple of really interesting experiences that were very close to, well, in fact, in two cases, exactly the same as things that Wang Shangjai talks about or is supposed to have done. One is when I was doing push hands with someone and I just lifted them straight up into the air like this, like they weighed nothing, and then just put them down, and the other person said, "How did you do that?" And I said, I don't know. And Wang Shangjai talks about that exact same incident happening to him. And for me, that's like in that moment, it was just like a fluke, perfect alignment of structure that, you know, I absolutely maximised my ability to use physical strength by having this perfect structure. And but most of the time, of course, your structure isn't perfect, but we're just trying to get up to that percentage point where, you know, it's 80-90% perfect when we hit the bag. Then every so often, your structure is in such perfect alignment and the correct amount of tension and relaxation that you hit, and it's like, wow, that hit was like twice as hard as I normally hit. Where did that come from? And then you're searching for that. And this all comes down to like our kind of intuitive engagement with the physical structure of our body and how everything is being aligned and working together, and all those elements. It's an incredibly sophisticated machine being controlled by this incredibly sophisticated computer. You can't say it's conscious and you can't say it's subconscious. So that's why, like, we sometimes talk about intention and no intention. It's between intention and no intention. It is physically, consciously felt, particularly through these intentional arcs, that, you know, you feel the structure of your body, and you feel that, and it's not subliminal. You know, it's body consciousness. So in some sense, it's some kind of direct consciousness, but it's also, obviously, you can't consciously think about every micro integration of every joint and structure and part of the body that contributes towards the hit. So some part of it is somehow subconscious. So it's this again, another contradiction and complex dialectic. Of course, that's exactly the same for every sport. It's no different for any sport whatsoever. And good sports science uses this idea to help people become better at achieving the aims of that particular sport. It just so happens that in martial arts we want some very specific things, like being able to hit with force, being able to defend, being able to move, and various factors that impact upon the functional outcome that we're aiming for within martial arts. I think what makes Yiquan very special is this focus on achieving this and how we achieve this and methods to achieve it. And that's what I want to talk about next. So in essence then, the whole thing is incredibly simple. We just want to form structures. So we want to hit with a certain amount of force in a particular way, and when we do that, the body forms a structure, what Zhao Daoxin calls a lock point. Well, those two things can be separated up a little bit. The lock point is the point where everything just, like, we can say stops for a split second, but split second is the operative concept there. Like, special effect. Zoom into the lock point, forming these different structures. Whereas structure also is a bit more of a complex. It exists in dialectical interaction with flow. So this idea, and think about yin yang and flow, and then forming into a structure. It's an idea that's at once in harmony with like kind of ancient Chinese philosophical principles, but also with straightforward science or biological science anyway, that we're using our body in a certain way, rather than just being floppy and disconnected, that we bring it all together into a coordinated structure. And this is the movement quality that we're developing. Standing, holding zhuangs does a lot of different things, but one of the things it's doing is helping the body to learn how to integrate into a whole with the correct sort of feeling, and then being able to play with structure. And if you look at videos of Yao Zhongzong doing standing, very interestingly, like he's never actually completely still. He's always just playing with movement. And I'm not saying you should do that, because it's something that you can do at a certain stage. First, you've got to get the right feeling. Anyway, I don't want to talk about standing. There's so much information out there on standing. I don't want to add to that. So the idea is incredibly simple, that we want to just form structures that hit with force, or do something with force. It could be defensive, could be hit, could be resist, could be throw, could be headbutt, could be anything. Could be avoid, and you can even bring it, despite what some people say, you can bring it into wrestling, you can bring it into anything. And we want to be able to flow and then form structure and hit the target with this very structural way of moving that's characteristic of each one. So that in essence is just like, it couldn't be any simpler. It's you just learn a certain way of moving. That's not that hard to do. Each one isn't hard. It's an incredibly simple idea. You learn a certain way of moving. You learn to bring that up to these lock points. Then you learn to flow. Then you learn to compromise. So sometimes there isn't enough time to use this, big structural movement. Sometimes you've got to make movements smaller, bigger, adding. So anyway, you learn that, and then you learn how to do it against a punch bag. You learn how to do it against mitts, and then you do it in sparring drills, and then you do it with someone trying to hit your back, and you make it work. The problem is, of course, most people can't make it work, and the reasons for that, I suppose, are fairly straightforward if we want to be completely honest about it, and that's that the actual fight training aspect of each one is very often neglected. So we've got loads and loads of people who have got really good body movement, and then, Wang Shengzai himself talks about it, he specifically says this, there are people who understand every detail and talk about all the theory and do all these demonstrations with compliant students and so on, and then when you say to them, can you show me how it works in practice? When someone's trying to hit you in the face, can you do it? They absolutely can't, and Wang Shengzai says they absolutely can't. When you ask them to do it, they absolutely can't do it. And that's because their wushu is one-sided, and Wang Shengzai talks about this idea of wushu being one-sided, of all kinds of martial arts being one-sided. And what that means is that there are core quintessence body movement skills that we're looking for. So this kind of dialectical interaction between tension and relaxation. And then there's the ability to form structures. And those are all accounted as quintessence movement skills. And anyone can do that. That's nothing. You know, dancers can do that for the most part. I mean, some other little bits and bobs. I mean, we're going to talk about how you issue force and how you use routing and stuff like that. But those are all quintessence movement quality skills, and that's just one side of wushu. And the other side of it is practical fight training. So if you want to say what is Yiquan, quintessence movement skills, practical fight training practice. And by practical fight training practice, we don't mean something fixed. So we don't mean this people who think like if you just do standing and you just develop this, and then when you come to a fight you'll just hit someone 3 times and you'll win and something like that. It's fantasy. I mean, it might happen. It might happen, but if we're thinking about in terms of not just defending yourself against the useless drunk down at the bar, but where you stand in relation to the global average fight level. So practical fight training and practice based on quintessence movement skills from Chinese physical culture. And those quintessence, again, it's another dialectic, those quintessence movement skills are ancient, Chinese cultural, and that practical fight training and practice, that's not fixed in the same way. Those are kind of fixed. Those are the methods that have been developed, standing and slow movement and structural movement. Those are kind of fixed methods, but the practical fight training practice isn't. That's constantly evolving. You've got to constantly be looking at, what's everyone else doing in other martial arts and so on. It's a way. It's not a fixed thing. It's an interaction between those two that changes over time. And Yao Zhongzhong talks about this and the necessity of constantly being aware of, well, what are the upgrades that are going on in the fight world, all around the world. And it is interesting how some people just think that it doesn't matter what the other person does or what kind of level they've got, that they're just going to go straight through it and they're going to hit and they're going to issue force and win. It might happen, but that's not actually the point. The point is that the method itself is the dialectical interaction between these two factors. It's a practical, active method. So yes, you can work on, you say, for example, your basic jab, but then you've got to think about other things like, well, how do you hit a target that's moving, and how do you think about defence? If you throw a jab and someone throws a counter, and what if they're southpaw and you're orthodox? What are the best tactical ways of moving and so on? And there's so many different things that then all those other martial arts, those other practical fight-based martial arts, they're all working on those things. And there's just a certain arrogance of people in each one, very often with people who can't fight, don't even spar, who just believe that somehow it will work for them. And it's quite interesting because those people, when I speak to those people, they will inevitably start telling me about how many street fights they've had, and I've had these street fights and it worked for me, and or I did this, I did loads of sparring back in the day, and blah 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 and so on. And I think that's totally missing the point. It's not about an outcome. It's not like, did you achieve this ability to be able to do that, and then you could do it in a fight. That's still relying on the idea that there's a fixed method. You do this, and then you do this, and you do this, and then that's it, and then somehow that's going to then transfer into fight practice. No, that's not it. There should be an ongoing dialectical interaction between your quintessence movement skills and practical fight training, and they should be informing one another constantly. So it's not about fighting, it's about fight training. It's about using up-to-date fight concepts and being interested in that. How does that work? How does that function? Look at all the interesting things that are going on in MMA at the moment, and and being up to date with what's happening in terms of fight training in the wider world, and then incorporating and adapting that into into your own training and spending time and letting those two things mutually inform one another. That's the method, that's how it functions, that's how it works. This is the genius of the idea. It's a contradiction between these ancient kind of fixed principles of quintessence movement skills and fight training. And that's it in essence, you know. It's not that simple though, is it? I know that. There is still this core, you know, there's still this core simple way of, you know, just release force, and, you know, that you can say is what Wang Shengjai calls the primordial Yiquan, but it's not enough on its own anymore. It's not. May have been in Wang Shengjai's day, it's not enough on its own. But nevertheless, that is the core, and that's where we would begin, and that's what I want to talk about the idea of structure in Yiquan. And we can think from the most basic idea, like our basic guard posture is a kind of structure. So straight away we have to engage our other side. So we've got our core quintessence movement skills, and we're trying to develop this this dialectical interaction between relaxation and tension that there isn't quite a word for in English. But we also then need to think about, and Wang Shengjai talks about this, you also then need to think about compromises that you've got to make with things like defence. And contrary to popular belief, Wang Shengjai and the others on them do talk about defence and the importance of defence. And Wang Shengjai particularly talks about finding this right kind of body feeling where you're kind of springy, you can receive some incoming force, but you're not brittle and tense like that, and you're not flopping. I think it's kind of common sense, isn't it? So this already is kind of structure, and the structure is being integrated around these intentional arcs. So your conscious body consciousness of this interconnection of joints around here, and then the way this is, then there's another kind of intentional arc this way, and one this way with your legs, and these are all interacting in very sophisticated ways that you are feeling as you move. But then you've got to start adding in the other side, so like the fight upgrades, and then being very adaptive around that. So different skill sets and there's different rules make certain things more or less useful. So it might not be that useful to constantly have this open guard in boxing. It might make more sense in MMA, and it might not be that useful to have this big open guard against a wrestler, because they want you to do that so they can get in and get the underhooks on and get around and control you more easily. So that's why you'll very often see wrestlers and they'll be bringing their arms in and they'll be doing that because they don't want to stick them out like that. It's a negative. And from this basic defensive structure, we can start then exploring across this idea of using like the unity of offense and defense, which I don't really want to talk about today because it's an involved concept, but we can think about things like, particularly I do it all the time, particularly if you're in an orthodox position and they're in southpaw position and they jab, you know, you can hit the jab, hit the arm like this with the, depending on how fast they are, of course. I mean, if someone's really fast, I can't do it, but nevertheless, this idea of an active guard, so it can engage with the oncoming person's guard and use and manipulate that. And that all relies on structure. So here's their guard, and here's a structure. This is a structure, and what makes it different is I'm not just doing that. And you can see there's a massive difference between just doing that, you know, just trying to grab like that, and using the structure immediately brings in my whole body. And one of the things I'm doing there straight away, instead of doing that when I do that, is rooting. That you can see that the whole body forms a structure and then it's down into the particular root that I'm using. And then same if I go the other way. a structural way of moving and forming these structures. The idea being it's stronger, it's more powerful, it's in harmony with the laws of physics, it's not contrary to the laws of physics, and it's in harmony with ancient principles of Chinese physical culture. Once we have this concept, then we begin to expand it, and really this is what the journey of Yiquan is or for me, this has been my experience. I mean, I wouldn't make videos about it if I wasn't prepared to stand up and say I know what I'm talking about. But I'm not saying I know everything or that there aren't other ways of thinking about it. But this is the way I've unfolded it, and well, you can see it works for me anyways. Once we've made the conceptual leap into understanding this concept of flow and then moving into structure, then in essence the journey of each one becomes very simple. That you're searching for a trained, intuitive ability to form the right structure in the right moment. And yeah, it's a little bit of a contradiction, but that's the same for any skill, isn't it? It's the same for any sport, that you train in particular techniques that have some relevance to the sports, and then you learn to improvise with them. You learn to, it's only what a tennis player's doing. They're always using variations of standard, straightforward things that they practice, apart from the odd time where you've got to know when to break the rules and do something a bit maverick. But for the most part, tennis players just using standard techniques that they've practiced and trained, but they're using them intuitively in the moment, and they develop the skill to form the right body structure to hit the target. And that's all we're trying to develop. It's just that there's an infinite variety of possible structures that the human body can form, and so we want something just a little bit more. Yeah, we want to think bigger. We want to think like, well, we want the ability to just intuitively be able to form the right structure to hit with force from any particular part of the body, and that's not easy, and I don't think anyone's ever been able to do it in every possible way, because some are so difficult, and there's an infinite variety. I mean, for me, things like I think that the hardest one is like, or one of the hardest ones, like if you want to hit from the back of, I don't know why you would, but you're carving, you want to pull back this way and issue force from the back of your leg. That's really, really hard. It's not the same, for example, doing this way, which roots differently from the back leg. But you might want to hit with like the back of your hip this way, and it's a little bit easier because you can twist with it. So you start learning these things like that. There's different ways of moving different body parts that you can issue force and form a structure that are easier than others. So eventually you start having this ability, this intuitive ability. The idea is incredibly simple, but it doesn't come easy. You've got to practice, and well, it depends how talented you are, but I have no talent. I just had to work really, really hard. But let's say you want to hit with this kind of punch up this way, and then you just intuitively know, but it's trained intuition. Eventually you forget, thousands of hours, literally thousands of hours of drills, working on different postures to, practice just going up, going in line, onto hitting this way. But you just know that when you hit this way, up this way, that it's going to root down, and the structure's going to be formed in this way, that you're going to use this kind of pivot routing that's going to come up this way. And if you want to do it with the backhand, then you change, and it pivot routes this way, and this is the structure. And then you also want to know, like, if I want to hit that with my shoulder this way, hit into the target, that I generally speaking use this kind of flat routing, so the feet stay on the floor. Don't usually twist it like that, maybe a little bit. Feet usually come up a little bit anyway whenever you think it's flat on the floor. When you actually hit with force and you see it on video, people's feet usually come up a little bit. Let's talk about that another But you start developing these intuitive abilities to form the structure, the appropriate structure, including the routing, which is a key aspect of the movement. So I'm going to, and here's a very instructive example, because this is slightly different. One, if I'm going slightly, I can do it both ways this way, because I'm using both hands is the rule. One, depending on what I want to do and how I want to move my opponent that way a little bit, so I'm rooting it and forming a structure this way. I want to move my opponent that way a little bit while I'm rooting it this way. And when I talk about rooting, we talk about, you know, the root very often, particularly from the back leg, very often pointing in the direction that you want the force to go. And that's it. That's the essence, the absolute essence of Yiquan. That you're just in flow, and then you form these structures. Using this in particular these intentional arcs that keep, and we say arcs because we keep this rounded curvature of the. I mean, there's always times where you break the rule, particularly when we start using defence and you need to cover up, and that's the whole other question. That's the whole other side of the equation, the fight training side, like knowing when you need to use structure onto, then knowing when you need to cover up, do something else, use your more modern fight training knowledge. So, for example, something I've talked about before, you might throw a punch and then knowing when to bring in this kind of movement, which it's obviously a really great upgrade into Yiquan. But if you look at Yiquan people sparring, it's very often not that good. And what's going on there is a failure to understand the importance of defence. And I can point to numerous videos where this is happening. I'll tell you exactly what happens is, you've got one person who's very aggressive, who's very good at using this kind of structural movement, and they will just dominate another person. And they'll just keep attacking. And the other person, who's two Yiquan people, just doing it. They're both doing it, and the one who's more aggressive just wears down the other person, either quickly or, well, usually quickly, and the other person just gives in straight away. And they give in, and then they start doing this, and then they start turning and getting pushed, and then they get turned and pushed, and that's it. And so yeah, there's a really good video of someone doing that, who looks really sharp. He's bim, 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 and then someone else comes in who does exactly the same movements. It's just absolutely straightforward Yiquan movements, and he's just that bit more aggressive. He's a little bit smaller as well, but he's just that bit more aggressive. And he does the same thing to the other guy who's just fun. The other guy's got no defence either. So once the just attack philosophy doesn't work, then he's doing great. He's forming all these structures, and then it doesn't work. The other guy's more aggressive, and he just gives up and turns, and then just starts getting beat up and pushed away. And that happens time and time and time and time and time again. And the only time you don't see that happening really well, there's another thing I could talk about at another time, but it's an issue about the relationship between sports sand art and Yiquan, that showing people doing sand art and saying it's Yiquan, which is very problematic. If you see well, yeah, I mean, that's what I always do. I always use me. I use me as an example. I don't put it out there on other people. If you look at me sparring, how I'm always pretty much using this structural movement. I'm following the Yiquan principles all the time. Like my hooks will very rarely go across the centre line, or my kicks stop at the centre line. I don't do these kind of round, very rarely, unless I'm doing it on purpose for show. I can do some flashy kicks. Generally speaking, when I'm sparring, my Yiquan looks like Yiquan. You know, it's guard engaged, it's centre line, it's structural, it's using the Yiquan structural postures. The only thing I'm not usually doing is hitting with full force because it's just training sparring. But then you see people doing sandar who are no different from any sandar fighters anywhere in the world who aren't adhering to those Yiquan principles. But people saying, oh look, this is such a body from an Yiquan school. And I think that's quite problematic, because if that's the case, then well, what about all those other people all over the world who fight exactly like that or better, who don't spend hours doing standing or slow movement or whatever? So there's some unpacking that people need to do and think about that yeah, lots of people, lots of wushu schools in China have a sandar branch, and lots of people who do Yiquan are training in sandar separately to Yiquan. And it's not, for example, proof of Yiquan in action. And then when you see actual, I mean, to see an Yiquan expert actually put on the gloves and risk getting punched in the face by someone who knows what they're doing, I mean, it's as rare as a snake's ankle, isn't it? I mean, other than me, you let me know if you've got any videos of any Yiquan instructors doing that. You know, I'm not even like an Yiquan instructor like them. I just practice Yiquan, and I teach people who are interested in learning. I don't charge any money or anything like that. It's not a commercial enterprise. It's just done out of love and interest, and all of this is just about sharing the ideas that we're developing. But that's very problematic, and it's the same as saying things like, well, such a person has got an Yiquan background and he runs a professional fight team, which I've heard a couple of times. Yeah, but is that professional fight team actually training in Yiquan or doing maybe some standing or something like that, but actually bringing those Yiquan structural techniques into the actual, live fighting scenario? When do you see that? I mean, you just don't see it. It's just, so that's a very problematic thing about using this idea. And what it does is it borrows credibility from sandar to say that Yiquan is effective. That's not the way forward. If we want to promote Yiquan, we've got to be showing that the methods themselves are effective, that the ideas are effective. And Yao Zhongzhen particularly talks about this idea that if your training isn't connected to the reality of the fight, that then when you actually come to do sparring, it just falls apart. And this whole thing about, well, everything just becomes kickboxing. Well, yeah, but there's kickboxing, and my kickboxing is very Yiquan flavoured, and other people's isn't. So we need to question why that is, and how we move forwards into integrating those structural and tactical and practical concepts of Yiquan into actual practical use. And the way to do that is exactly the method that I described earlier, the dialectical interaction between quintessence movement principles and practical fight training and practice. And need to do a practical video of it working with my student, but it's very simple. Actually it is really, really simple to do. First of all, you've got to get over your fear of sparring, which is really, really easy to do. Just start light and build. All the nonsense that people come out with to hide the fact that they haven't got the skills for sparring, they're too unfit to spar, they're too afraid to spar, and they're too afraid to lose face because their theory isn't dialectically interactive with practical training, fight practice. It just isn't. So they can have students stand there all day and say, my student does, if he's very strong, I'll move him like this and I'll hit him like this, and everyone looks great when they're doing that. Everyone looks great when they're hitting the back. Can't tell you how many times I've seen like someone who looks absolutely great hitting a punch bag, and then you put on the gloves and do some sparring with them, and they're nowhere. Like they're so unused to being hit, and punch bags teach you every bad habit in the world if you use them as a proxy for free sparring. So you just can't trust this, that people are working with their student, do this and do this, and now let's see you do it while someone who knows what they're doing is trying to smack you right in the face, or when you've just been smacked in the face and you've got to keep going, and you've got to have those fight skills. So they've got to get over that. They've got to get over being told that. You know, this is about promoting Yiquan in the future. These instructors have got to get over being told that, you know, because they don't like it, obviously, because they lose face. They've got to get over threatening people. They've got to get over insulting people. They've got to get over, you know, of course I'm talking about the way they speak to me. And they've got to get the gloves on and shut up with all the bullshit and get the gloves on, get sparring and get practical fight training experience. And then from there, they've got to be engaged and interactive with how they're thinking about, well, you know, how do I make this jab work, this Yiquan jab work? And then you just work on drills. You know, your partner's just going to move back, and you're just going to step in and you're just going to jab, and then the next time you're going to jab and they're going to throw a hook and you 1, 2, and you just drill it, and you just do sparring drills, then just bring it into control sparring. It's easy, it's simple, and then all you have to do then is bear in mind while you're doing your sparring that you want to conform to these principles, and for the reasons why, like you want to hit centre line, you don't want to swing over like that. You want to hit centre line and then back in. You don't want to go into any dead time. You know, and these like structural genius of each one, like you hook and you stop at the centre line. They go under your hook. You know, they and you drop onto this way, things like that. And you start seeing, this is why you did. So you hook and you go past and you get pushed. And you see, that's why you stop at the centre line and so on. And just bringing it consciously into your free sparring, and it works. It works. It's simple. It's a simple idea, and it works.